Hello and welcome to Glitch Cube. We're a gaming podcast, and I forgot the thing. How many times have I said that?
Oh, shit, my window's open too. What a great start.
Yeah, right? I should leave this in the episode. Oh, gosh. Okay, cut. No. Wait, what do I say? Now I have a brain fart. Something about the art of video games. I don't. My brain really doesn't remember.
I got you.
Okay, go. I'm probably going to leave this in.
Hello and welcome to Glitch Cube. We are a gaming podcast that focuses on the art of video games and indie games. I'm Chris.
And I'm Christian.
And welcome back, y'all. I know it's kind of weird having the other guy do the intro. It does feel weird.
It does. Roles reverse here. I feel like I should be talking.
Right? And now I'm sitting here like, I'm just waiting for him to jump in.
All right. Well, roles reverse. That was fun. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Sorry, brain fart there. Probably going to cut down that a little bit, but I do want to leave that in because that was stupid. But anyway, we're going to be talking to you guys this week about indie games. Once again, I mean, indie games are a pretty big part of our channel here, right? We talk about them a lot because there is such a wide collection of indie games spanning every single type of genre out there. And we started asking the question, like, what is an indie game anymore? The definition of indie has definitely changed over the years, and the vibe of an indie game has definitely changed. With the evolution of these different game makers out there, like Unity becoming so accessible and then not accessible now, thanks Unity, and then they're trying to backtrack and whatever. But then we have other game engines out there like Godot or Unreal being free and available for everyone. Like indie games are starting to have that AAA polish. So we wanted to really ask the question of what is an indie game anymore? Well, the definition of an indie game is just a game made by a small group of people, and by that don't have a major developer behind them, right? A AAA developer. So it could be a team of up to somewhere around 20 people, even like Hades. But because it's not a huge publisher like EA or Sony or working on this project, it's still classified as indie, which is kind of a weird idea nowadays, right? Because back in the day when we thought about indie, they were games that were usually passed around. They were Flash games. They were small browser games. They were things like that. They weren't really mainstream titles. They didn't have an initial release on the console. It might have happened later, but for the first part, like when it first got released, it was never out there for the masses. It wasn't in advertisements. It wasn't spoken about by these big publisher companies or the magazines or the blog posts and all that. Like, it wasn't really in the mainstream media. But now we're seeing this weird like evolution of indie games where it is now mainstream and it is in people's faces, and they can have a full console release with the backing of those consoles without actually being a part of them. So they still get classified as indie. Kind of, right? It's kind of a weird market because it's a big umbrella term that covers everything. Because whenever you look at sites like Itch.io has a lot going on, right? But those are indie titles. And there's a lot of weird games out there. There's a lot of small games that we're more used to when we think about indie. But then you look at other titles like, Celeste. Celeste is a huge game. Or Hollow Knight. Look at the backing between Hollow Knight. Like, that is an indie game. Or even Minecraft was an indie game. It no longer is because now it's owned by Microsoft. So it now is not part of that genre anymore, or that classification. So games can go back and forth between indie and AAA. And it's kind of the waters are getting murky, right? The lines are starting to blur between what is actually indie and what is AAA anymore. So we wanted to really kind of just have a basic conversation about this and see what we can kind of come up with of what actually makes an indie title an indie title. So I know that you were and you are a resident, expert on indie games. Why don't you chat about them a little? Like, what is your overall experience? I know that we've talked about this quite a bit on the show, but for people, maybe this is a first episode, and that's a little weird. But that's okay. Welcome everybody. Maybe you can dive in, and what would you say, as being an avid player of indie games and someone that seeks them out? What makes a game indie to you?
As I'm looking at itch.io right now, and it's confusing website, and this
They
is
need
gonna
a
be a
better
little.
website.
So I'm so used to the comfort of Steam,
Mhm.
and like every time I go to, is it itch.io or itch.io? I always hear people say either or, but I'm just gonna say itch because it's easy. But
I always just say itch.io, but
it's
that's
weird because
probably
it's like,
wrong.
oh, add to collection. I'm like, okay, so this is like a little wish list, or I can make a list of cool games. Awesome. But then it's like, it it just feels unintuitive, but at the same time I kind of like it because it just fits like the scene, the
Mhm.
space, right? Like it's very like it feels like it's up and coming even though it's been like this. But
Mhm.
for me, the definition of like what people would consider indie games nowadays, I think like a lot of other people, my early experience of it was with Braid,
Yeah.
very early 2000s. Then right after that, Cave Story was another big one. And I think Cave Story was really the one that made me realize like, oh, wow, like this is awesome.
I think the big 3 for me were Braid, Cave Story, and Fez. I feel like those
Mm.
3 really just kind of changed the whole idea of indie.
Yeah, for me, I'm kind of there with you. I think it would be Braid, Hotline Miami, and it might be Fez. Or Binding of Isaac was the other one that I was
Or
like,
Super Meat Boy. Yeah.
yeah, like that. God, that era of indie was just like insane. But when you look at indie games back then, even though they were around way longer than that, it was still like, a small team or a solo dev. There weren't really any publishers taking chances on it. They were self-published. And I, like I said in past episode, I've been kind of looking into wanting to explore more of like very early indie games, which, if you go pre Y2K, you have to start looking for independent developers rather than just saying indie games because you won't find anything, right? Like
Mhm.
I've scrubbed different databases on websites for games pre 2000 and it's hard. It's something that's, independent developed games is actually really hard to look into is something I'm learning. And
Well, I feel like those, like the early games would get bought up really quickly. I mean, look at Tetris, right? Tetris was made by one man, but it got bought up really quickly. So like it almost classifies as an indie game, but
it's,
then it got distributed by like mainstream developers, right? But it wasn't,
yeah,
right? It's kind
it's,
of weird.
it's weird because like I'm avoiding like shareware stuff because that obviously was like the big indie scene back then.
Hmm.
But post shareware, you had your flash games that was on the rise, and they're considered indie games. Some of them actually became actual like games, but finding independently developed games on a console at the time was very rare because
Mm.
for the most part you needed a publisher in order to fund the discs, all of that kind of stuff, the marketing. So that
There was a
really
lot of
just leaves,
overhead. Yeah.
yeah, there was a lot of overhead that probably most people couldn't afford. And that's why I was looking through the PC databases on some websites. And yeah, there were a lot of games out there. It's just you have to scrub through it. And then you have to come to the realization like, even though it's a solo dev, they're published by, I don't know, Sierra. Like, would you consider that indie? Because it's Sierra, right? They were
Mhm.
very big at the time. And that's kind of where I got the idea for this episode is I saw someone complaining on Twitter about how, developers on itch.io, for the most part, they're solo devs or very small teams. They are self-publishing and, they consider themselves indie, which, makes sense. That's how it started. And they look at say games published by Annapurna or even Devolver, where they say should we consider this indie anymore because it's got a very high budget for their games. And I feel like with Annapurna it's a little different because I think that they actually really pump a lot of money into their stuff to fine tune it, whereas I feel like Devolver kind of just gives some funds. Doesn't have much say into the game, I feel like.
No, anybody can apply to be a part of Devolver. You just have to submit your game, and if they say yes, then now you're, published by them.
Yeah, so I feel like with Devolver, you're still kind of kept to where you can do your own thing. But from what I understand with Annapurna, it's not really as
there's a little less creative control. Right.
It's more like if there was a AAA, indie scene, or it's weird because we don't really have a term for this middle ground because it can't be a B game because that's already something. And a lot of these indie titles are very well made, very well done, where it's they may not have the budget of a AAA or a AA game, but they're not completely indie to the point where there's no backing. And
right.
It's kind of hard to decide because you look back in the early days, right? 80s, 90s, and if they weren't published, it was just shareware, or it was the demo scene, or there's one other thing too that I'm thinking of, but I forgot. But it's interesting how just within the span of 15 years or so, that scene just changed. And I think once people realize oh, there can be some very high quality indie titles, we should publish them. And I mean, you see Sony, right? And Xbox. I mean, this is the other thing when I was doing research, a lot of games were made on I think it's the XNA engine, which is the Xbox kind of centered engine for the indie titles, which I think nowadays people can actually make games on that engine, but there's a fork to it, which is that's actually something I was looking into recently when I was looking into wanting to make a game. I was oh, what about XNA?
I feel like Xbox was one of the first people to include indie on their marketplace.
They were because of the whole Xbox arcade, and then I felt like the Xbox arcade was for the indie games that were a little, more accessible to people. And then there was the Xbox indie games, which was that little separate. And it was some of those games were rough. I'll put it that way. I remember looking at some of those screens and I'm this is a Minecraft ripoff. Oh, this is barely used asset flip, dungeon crawler kind of game.
Or another stickman fighting game. Yeah.
Dude.
So many of those.
There's a new one out and it looks freaking awesome.
I'm so surprised that that's still a thing.
Dude, I'll have to link
me
you
away.
It's crazy. But Xbox I think had a really strong hand in that. And I think that was a time when Castle Crashers came out, right? And then there was Alien Hominid, which was a Flash game, but when it went on the Xbox, it changed. Things got different. And I know that there was some games that were indie, and then they went to Xbox and they didn't do too well. And the problem with that is publishing, right? If you don't have a good marketing team, it's going to be tough. And I was reading an article going into Darwinia, which is usually considered one of the early like modern indie games. I think it came out like very early 2000s. And while it did okay on the PC when it first came out, when they ported it to Xbox, it did really well for like, I think it was the first 6 weeks, and then it just fell off. And that was something that when I was digging through some other developers' articles, they mentioned that like, oh, we saw like great initial, influx of money, and then it just died, which, probably still is true today. Like that happens. But nowadays you have the ease of the internet, you have the ease of social media to kind of keep yourself relevant. And I feel like a lot of games nowadays do stuff to stay relevant and trendy if you're on social media and you see it. So there's that aspect of it. So I think nowadays, aside from like, the learning of being a game dev and all that, getting your game out there to the world is so much easier now, because I follow a lot of developers on Twitter and like other social media sites too, but mostly there. And it's crazy. Like,
it's X now. Sorry.
Yeah. Never forget,
Yeah.
But I love going, like, it's great because the algorithm is just skewed to that for me on that one account. And it's cool because you see people just posting like their updates, everything. And I'm like, oh, I love this. Like it makes me want to make a game. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, it makes me want to buy that game, which back in the day, you didn't really have that kind of option to see games like so easily, right? Like you would sometimes see a video on their store page, and even then it wouldn't be enough.
Well, and a lot of these big indie games back in the day, especially like on the original Xbox Marketplace, they would get front page for a while, right? But then every week, I feel like Xbox knows they have to keep it fresh, keep it new. So those games got then taken off of front page and then just put alphabetical order, right? And a lot of people, I mean, I do it because I like to look at all the games that are available. Won't browse for games in alphabetical order. They're going to look for what's either on front page, easily accessible, or what's in the media currently right now. And like you said, back then, I mean, we had MySpace, and that was about it, really. Like it wasn't as easy to share and market and keep your things relevant in people's faces as it is nowadays. So, like you said, yeah, marketing was really difficult. Like you needed an entire team available 24/7 to make that happen. And a lot of these guys didn't do that. A lot of this stuff was just passion projects even, right? It's just somebody in their home that just really wanted to make a game, put it out there, got lucky on the front page, and then it died out fairly quickly, right? Because the very next week, a new game gets put up there as their poster boy for indie games, right? Like, so it doesn't surprise me that there was such a fast drop off for these early indie games. Whereas now you have stuff like, I mean, Hollow Knight is a cult classic to this day, right? Like kids are still playing Hollow Knight. Like I had a kid come into my class a couple days ago, and he looked like he was upset, and he's never really upset. He's usually cheerful. And I'm like, what's going on, man? Like, you okay? And his response made me laugh. He's like, man, I'm trying to beat Hollow Knight, and I'm stuck on the final boss, and I'm having such a hard time. And it's so cool to think that, like, I mean, he's 9, right? Like, this is still relevant to today, and it wouldn't be without, like, it's because of the ease of access with Steam and the ease of people sharing ideas and things like through Instagram and through X now, previously Twitter, right? Like, and YouTube keeping things relevant, right? Like, because of how many different media platforms we have and how easily accessible they are to the masses, it's definitely keeping indie games on the forefront longer. And like I said, it's making more people want to purchase these games because they still feel relevant. They still feel new, even though they've been out for a while. Right. And
Hmm.
yeah, so it's a different kind of market. And I do feel bad. Like I'm curious, like for instance, like Darwinia, right? Like if that game came out today, how long do you think it would be like on people's minds? Right? Like I feel like that kind of game or given the popularity that it had and the fact that people still adore it, I feel like it would be one of the big indie titles that are still talked about today. But because the social media wasn't there or the marketing wasn't there originally, like it's just not happening, right? So I'm curious to see what would happen like if we had re-releases of things or remarketing tools for these guys, right? Like posting more on Instagram about it or like putting it back in the mainstream of things or going on like TikTok and stuff like that and talking about Darwinia, like how many would they get a random surge, right? Like I'd be very curious.
There's so recently there was a game that this is also considered one of the older indie titles, right? From I think 2006, Tory Bash. And I don't know, I feel like I remember this game back in the day, but basically it was a online multiplayer fighting game, but you could design, like you can make your own moves, and your character just looked like a bunch of balls kind of. And it was very like customizable, and I felt like that game, like it was decent at the time, kind of big, but it just died off. And then I think it was a few months ago it blew up again. They did some stuff to it, and it just got big out of nowhere again. It's got a battle pass. It has all this stuff, and it like came back from the dead. And it's interesting because there are a lot of really cool games out there, but from the past that kind of got lost in time. And it's sad. Like been digging through some of these older titles, and yeah, some of them are pretty rough looking, but other ones, they look like they have really interesting stories. And actually, I kind of want to cover a lot of them, you know?
So indie games, like, it's mind blowing how much they've changed over the years, right? Like the lines are definitely blurring there, even more so with the graphical quality of these games. Like AAA games are starting to use more retro style graphics, which I think is really funny because that used to be synonymous of indie games. And indie games now have access to some really high end graphics, making it almost impossible to tell the difference between these two titles. Like the lines are definitely blurred there 100%. And that really just kind of begs the question of what's the future of indie games? What's going to be happening next with them? Or what's the natural progression here, right? And I'm almost curious of where are AAA games going to be in the future? And what do indie games look like in 10 years, right? And it begs the question of like, who's going to be the ones to take the risks? With the expansion of the graphical quality of AAA games, because regardless of AAA games going for retro looks sometimes or kind of like interesting, they take little risks when it comes to the look of their games, but when it comes to like the quest lines or the content or things like that, they're less likely to take a full on risk on that part because they need to make money, right? And games can be very expensive to make. And with the enhancement of graphics and all that stuff, and now we're starting to get things like mocap involved to get realistic graphics because people just want better and better and better. And that's what we come to expect of AAA titles. The price tag to create these games is just rising higher and higher and higher. So, what does that mean for the general content? Because the price tag is now raising up more and more and more, I feel like we're going to see a lot more rinse and repeat games. I mean, we already kind of see that now with AAA. Every once in a while, they'll take a big risk and throw something out there and then see if it's a hit. And sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, right? But for the most part, they don't really want to gamble with their money that way. And that's where indie games step in. So indie games are going to be able, I feel like they're going to be able to give us that polish that we're looking for from a AAA game, but then still have those risks involved, whether it's genre bending or it's story driven or right, it's like just kind of weird content that you wouldn't normally see in a video game or extremely personal stories that you wouldn't see in a AAA title, right? Like, I think that's the future of indie here, of it just growing to the point where now they are the only ones taking risks. And then whenever we see AAA games coming out, it's more of this is a model that has worked for us in the past. We've spent millions of dollars on this. So we have to use the same model because we know that we made money there, right? So there's definitely going to be a lot less risk involved. And I feel like we're starting to see that now, right? There's a couple games out there that are started to kind of push it a little bit, and I would still consider them like big titles. Like, I mean, look at Final Fantasy, right? Final Fantasy went through a very big change in the way that it delivers its combat, the way the gameplay is. And luckily, I mean, 16 is great, right? It's a fantastic game. It was so much fun, and it paid off for them. But that's a gamble that most studios aren't going to be able to afford. Like Square Enix can afford that. They're fine. I think they're doing okay. And they're going to continue doing okay no matter what. But some of these other guys that are still considered AAA, they have to keep up, right? They have to be able to still afford those high-end graphics, afford these engines. Like, software is not cheap. Software is insanely expensive nowadays. I mean, looking at something like, for instance, like this isn't game design related, but I was looking at CAD software for work because I'm trying to figure out some stuff I can help teach the kids, get them used to using CAD and, for their futures and all that things, right? But like we were looking at Fusion 360. Fusion 360 is $1,800 a year for one person to use. It's not even a multi-purpose license, right? It's $1,800 a year for one, right? And then if you look at things like ZBrush, oh my gosh, ZBrush is, I think it's around the $3,000 mark a year for that. And ZBrush is a huge tool used by a lot of AAA developers to get some amazing graphics out there. The graphics that we've come to expect. So the barrier of entry is becoming much more vast. And to ask somebody off, like fresh out of school, to have experience in these things is damn near impossible. So that cost is now being eaten by these development companies, right? And that's just the 3D engine. That's not even the dev kit for actually developing a game for the consoles, because that's a whole nother cost on top of that. And then whenever it comes to things that are going to be on multiple platforms, now you have to buy multiple dev kits, and then you're basically making the same game multiple times for a PC release, a Xbox release, a PlayStation release, and a Nintendo release, right? Like, you have to make your game 4 separate times to fit the constraints that dev kit currently has. And each one of those dev kits cost money. And most of them are actually on a license base, and it's usually for a year or a 3-year cost. Some software allows you to buy things outright, but most software nowadays is going to yearly plans, or monthly plans. So the price is astronomical, honestly. So the amount of risks that are going to be taken are abysmal in the future if the prices continue to raise like this. And that's where indie is going to step in, because indie developers are not afraid to use those free programs. Sure, it might not have all the polish that people come to expect, but that's okay, right? It's accessible. It's easy to use. Well, quote unquote, easy to use, right? And some of that stuff's really hard. Blender's freaking hard to use. But like it's accessible, right? And then that allows them to tell their story. They don't have a big boardroom that's telling them what kind of story that they need to make. They can express their own personal stories. And that's where we're going to get some, like, if you want a game that really tugs at your heartstrings, we're going to be leaning towards indie titles. If you want one that just has mad polish and it's like a style that you want to play and you know it's true and true, like if you're looking for another first-person shooter to just have fun with your friends, you're probably going to lean towards the AAA because that's an easy model that they can replicate over and over again. The only thing they have to do is up the graphics. That's really it. If they're able to keep up with current modern-day graphics, but keep that content the same, then they have a good formula that's probably going to make them money. And we're going to see a lot more of that where it's a lot of the same game, but just a little prettier, right? At least that's what I feel like the future of this is going to be. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I mean, especially when you look back at how experimental like the PlayStation 1 was, or the 2, I feel like once we hit like, I always forget the number gen, but like the 360 PS3 era, like bigger companies like AAA, AA, they kind of stopped experimenting and making weird stuff. I mean, look back at Sony, right? Like they had Pepsi Man, they had, Vib Ribbon, like they had just Guitaru Man,
Guitar Man was
like
awesome.
They had all of these cool things that they weren't
like
afraid with experimenting.
I mean, like Katamari was an experiment too. Yeah.
And Patapon's getting a new game. It's just being made independently, like the same person, but it's like a spiritual successor kind of thing. Which that's what we're starting to see nowadays. Like Earden Chronicles, right? It's Suikoden people, but independently they're making it because obviously Konami controls that IP. And a lot of these developers from back in the day, since they can't make a sequel or a new game in the franchise that they had worked on because it's tied up in big publishers or big companies, they just make a spiritual successor. And honestly, usually they're pretty good,
Except for Mighty Number 9, but whatever.
Yeah. That's one I always forget. Yeah. But I think that's something that also really bugs me about a lot of AAA gaming is that it's just not, it doesn't stand out enough, like, yeah, a lot of Sony first party games nowadays, like, they're cinematic, they tell a good story, but at the end of the day, it doesn't surprise me as much as, say, a game like an indie title that has a good story, right? Like Night in the Woods or, Bastion, stuff like that. And it's a bummer because while I would love to see these big studios with a lot of money make something very odd and different, you don't see it that much. And I mean, I love Humanity. Like that game is awesome. And I think it's maybe one of the more experimental first party games that kind of flew under the radar this year. But the game's awesome. It's such a fun little puzzle game. And I think when it comes to like a lot of first party experiments, it's usually puzzle games because they can kind of get away with doing something odd. But, any chance I get, I can talk about Humanity, I will. I love that game. I wish I could take it on the go with me everywhere because it's like quick, fun little maps. But do I think we'll see a return to big companies making odd games? Maybe not. I mean, I think Nintendo might be the closest to it, but Nintendo just stays being Nintendo, and even them.
Well, they're still just rinsing and repeating their characters, right? I mean, there's the new Peach game that's coming out, which is cool, but it's something that we're familiar with. Robo? Right? Like, bring those back. That'd be cool.
Like, think back to the GameCube era where they just went crazy, right? They had Cubivore, they had Chibi Robo, they had, it's Sega, but they had Billy Hatcher. Like, there was so many, like, odd characters, so many odd titles. Like, that generation of games had so many weird things. Hell, look at the Dreamcast. It had Seaman.
That,
You know,
talking
like,
about weird games, yeah.
you know, it's, you don't see those kind of weird things. And granted, probably a lot of these games wouldn't work today. Not just because they might be problematic, but it's like they just are kind of antiquated. But it's nice seeing something different. And that's why I go to indie games, because I know that someone's probably going to create something because they're not worried about some big publishing house like pulling all their money, right? Like,
Yeah.
you go on Itch.io and there's so much stuff
You're gonna
on it
find some
that you
weird
can
shit.
probably find something, right? Like, if I want a post-apocalyptic furry simulator, like romance simulator, and it's a deck building roguelike, I'm pretty sure I can find it. You know, like, it's insane what's out there. And a part of me thinks, like, you know, I wanted to start cataloging like a lot of indie titles and stuff throughout the years, but when it comes to more recent, where, you know, everyone has access to a game engine pretty easily now, it'd be hard to like be like, okay, let's cover this game. Let's cover this game. You look at Itch.io and it's like, look how many thousands of games came out just in 2020. Like,
Yeah.
it's very hard to catalog games in more recent times. Like, you can go and look through people's channels that cover games released on older consoles because, you know, they ended and nothing really new is made for them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easy. But when it comes to a lot of these PC indie titles, it's like half of them that you find probably aren't complete. So you'd have to dig through that. And then the other half, it's just like, would you just stick to ones that gained a following? Would you try to find the hidden gems so then you stick out on social media for like an hour? Like, it's,
yeah. Do you want to be that guy?
it's
Yeah.
interesting where we're at. And like, I truly love like the time we're in right now with indie titles, especially because it's, I think we're seeing the broadest like landscape of ideas. There's so many interesting ideas that are just being merged and thrown together that it just feels good. And, you know, big companies are buying studios like that. You know, you look at Kena Bridge of Spirits for PlayStation, like, great little game, small studio that got bought up. Like, I think that's what we're going to see next, are these big companies buying smaller studios. And,
yeah,
you
we've
know,
seen that a lot. I mean, Stray, Kena, like, that's been happening a lot more lately. Because Stray is an indie game.
Stray.
I mean, that was started by just a couple people, right? And it got bought up, and they obviously helped them polish it and put it out and actually get it made. But yeah, that's another one of those examples of an indie game that gets picked up, but it's still an indie game, right? So it's kind of like bridging the gap, or it's both at the same time, right? It's kind of weird to think about.
It's hard to be like how Concerned 8 of, you know, Stardew fame, where it's one person. Same with, like, you know, Toby Fox of Undertale. Like, it's hard to be where it's just one person and they're their own publisher and they make it big. You know, it's not impossible to do, but you don't.
The stars definitely need to align.
Yeah, like, it doesn't happen for everything, right? Like,
and it needs a fishing mechanic. If it doesn't have a fishing mechanic, then it's not a real indie game. I'm sorry. No,
yeah,
I'm just kidding. It just feels
the
like
Stardew one was
everything.
bullshit back in the day. I will say that much.
It was bad. It was bad.
But, you know, you look at some of these successful ones, and I found the story on, you know, the creators of Myst very interesting, because they were an indie studio all the way back in the day. You know,
Crazy.
You go back, I feel
like Myst was such a big game back in the day, right? Like,
it started off independent and then it got picked up. And then
Right.
that's why you started seeing books being made about it. You saw multiple sequels. Like, it's interesting, how of a phenomenon Myst was. But, you can go back even older with the game Another World, right? Like, that
Mhm.
game was treated as like a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, people still think it's a masterpiece. Like, it's,
It got a re-release on the phones too.
yeah, I feel like I need to play that game because so many people have said like how amazing it is. Same with Flashback, which I
Yeah.
know that's getting I think a remake. I don't think it's a remaster, but those games were independently made too. And it's fascinating when you go back in the day where a good chunk of games were independently made.
Mhm.
It's fascinating how nowadays, like, the ease of game engines really make it possible for anybody to really pick it up. I mean, hell, I'm learning it right now, and it's not difficult. I mean, if I had all day I could spend learning it, I probably would get through this a lot faster, but it's easy enough to understand. It's not like I'm learning basic or assembly and, hating my life.
Yeah.
So I'm excited, and it's every year I feel like it just gets better and better with indie games. Like this year alone, it's like I feel like this year I can't keep up
Yeah.
with new titles. Like I'm at the point right now where it's like I just beat Umbrella and I really enjoyed it, but now I'm like, oh god, which one do I want to play next? Like there's
Mhm.
now that spooky season's coming up, I'm like, oh, I should pick some horror titles, like, and there's some good ones that just came out or are coming out, so I'm excited, but still I'm just like, oh my god, it's a great time to be in the scene.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us this week. Hope you guys enjoyed this little conversation here into indie games. I mean, indie games are just such a pivotal part of our channel. Figured we might as well have just a full episode dedicated to just indie in general, because they are the risk takers. They are the ones that are pushing the genre still to this day, despite how, AAA games like to stay the same. I mean, can't blame them, right? It costs a lot of money to make these games, and it's just getting more and more expensive as it goes along. But anyway, we'll talk to you guys next week with some more games and all that good stuff. But until then, bye for now.